I was standing in my kitchen sipping black coffee when I heard the unmistakable roar of heavy machinery. At first, I thought it was one of the nearby farms starting early harvest, but then I felt the rumble in the floorboards. That wasn't normal. I dropped the mug and sprinted out the front door in my socks, only to see the most surreal sight of my life. HOA President Karen, perched like some kind of evil queen atop a bulldozer, waving papers in one hand while her machine devoured my cornfield row by row. She was actually smiling. The corn stalks, which I had meticulously grown over months, were being shredded into oblivion by spinning steel teeth, and Karen shouted over the engine noise that she was doing the community a favor. What she didn't know, what nobody knew, was that this wasn't just corn. That field had been specially reserved for a NASA weather balloon launch scheduled in less than 3 days. It was classified until the mission began, and now, thanks to Karen's Saturday morning demolition derby, we were potentially sabotaging a federal experiment. She had no idea she'd just started a war with science, the government, and me. The whole thing felt unreal, like one of those nightmare loops where you scream but nothing changes. I darted toward her, yelling for her to stop, my feet kicking up dirt as I ran. She didn't flinch. Just raised those smug HOA documents like a holy artifact and yelled back, "This corn violates community beautification standards and fire safety codes." I couldn't believe it. She'd just fabricated her own authority, and was using it like a weapon. The bulldozer kept advancing, flattening another 100 square feet as if my property meant nothing. I glanced back at my house, where a rust-colored government lockbox with encrypted hardware still sat on the porch, equipment delivered under complete secrecy for the balloon telemetry test. Karen had no clue what she was trampling. This wasn't just a field. It was mission ground zero. I ran to the edge of the destroyed patch, waving my arms, trying to make her stop before she hit the equipment markers, but her eyes were on some twisted prize, as if leveling my field earned her some invisible badge of honor. That was when my neighbor Alan, an old-timer who knew everything about everyone, came running out from his porch in a camo robe holding a frying pan. "Karen, what in God's name are you doing?" he shouted, brandishing the skillet like he meant to duel the bulldozer. Karen didn't even blink. She screamed back, "This is a beautification emergency. I'm executing executive HOA cleanup authority." I blinked. That wasn't even a real thing. She'd invented her own title and bulldozed my corn with it. And still, she smiled, as if the destruction of someone's livelihood was some sick accomplishment. I was done playing defense. I bolted inside, grabbed my phone, and hit the encrypted emergency line. I knew I wasn't supposed to call unless there was actual risk to the equipment or the mission, but this definitely qualified. The secure operator transferred me immediately. A calm voice answered, "This is Dr. Talley." "Speak." The second I told her the field had been bulldozed by an unauthorized civilian, she paused for a long time. Then she said, "I need coordinates. We're dispatching a team immediately. Do not approach the site again until they arrive." Karen was still out there, bulldozing another row as if the field was some kind of amusement ride. I came back outside to find a growing group of neighbors gathering around, half of them in disbelief, the other half filming. One guy was live-streaming on an app, narrating the entire thing like it was a wildlife documentary. Karen, on the other hand, now had one of her cronies, Dennis, the HOA treasurer, waving a laminated map of the neighborhood. Dennis looked as confused as everyone else but still tried to act like he was in charge. I asked him what law allowed them to tear through private farmland without any warning, and he actually said, Section 4 Subrule 18C regarding overgrowth hazards and invasive agriculture. I asked if he even knew what that meant. He didn't. Karen just yelled, "It's corn that's literally invasive in some regions." I thought Alan was going to throw the frying pan at her. Then came the funniest part, if you can call anything about this hilarious. One of the local teens watching the spectacle asked, "Hey, isn't this where those unmarked government trucks came last week for like a weird science thing?" My heart dropped. That was exactly what I'd feared. Now people were connecting. The The cover story I was told to use was that I was testing soil hydration systems for climate research. Not something that screamed federal mission. But now, thanks to Karen's bulldozing spree, we had the attention of everyone, including the people we were trying to keep out of the loop. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Karen dismounted from the bulldozer like she was stepping down from a throne. She handed Dennis a clipboard and started marching toward me, voice rising in pitch. "You'll be billed for obstruction of neighborhood harmony, vandalism of public visual aesthetics, and unpermitted soil saturation." I blinked. "That's not even a real thing," I snapped. She wagged a finger like I was a child. "You and your corn are done here." That's when the first black SUV arrived. Quiet, no lights, just smooth tires crunching gravel. It parked just past the mailbox and 4 figures stepped out. Suits, earpieces, and one tall woman in a dusty NASA windbreaker. Dr. Talley. Her eyes scanned the mess, and then she spoke with the tone of someone who had 0 patience left in her life. "Who authorized heavy machinery on federally designated launch grounds?" Karen opened her mouth to respond, but Dr. Talley cut her off. "I asked a question, not for a story. You have exactly 10 seconds to explain your role here before I start contacting agencies that carry badges." Karen stuttered something about HOA protocol and fire safety, waving her clipboard like it had national power. Dr. Talley took the clipboard, glanced at it, and handed it to one of her team members without a word. Then she walked past her and examined the flattened rows. I saw her eyes pause where one of the underground cable markers had been torn. Her jaw clenched. She turned to me. "We need aerial scans. This may be a breach." Then to Karen, she said coldly, "Ma'am, you've potentially interfered with a weather stratospheric tracking mission linked to orbital satellite relay. That means tampering with federal telemetry. You may have just committed a felony." For the first time, Karen blinked. Her mouth opened. No sound came out. The crowd that had been murmuring suddenly fell silent. Alan crossed his arms and said, "Told ya." Dr. Talley turned to me. "We're staying on site. No one gets near the field without clearance." She looked back at Karen. "That includes you." A large man from her team stepped forward, quietly placing a temporary boundary tape from his kit. Another car rolled up. This time the local sheriff, looking extremely confused as he took in the scene. The following morning, I woke to the distant hum of generators and the low-frequency chatter of radios just beyond the house. NASA's team had moved fast. The field, though scarred and stripped bare in patches, was now cordoned off with temporary fencing, security lights, and personnel stationed every 20 feet. I stood on my porch watching their setup, still barefoot, coffee in hand, brain half-fried from the chaos. Everything felt like it had shifted overnight. My simple life as a farmer with a government side contract had turned into a full-scale operation with more government presence than a classified airfield. And at the center of it all, Karen, the woman who thought HOA power outranked the United States federal government, was already spinning her own tale. It didn't take long for the rumors to fly. By midday, a small crowd had gathered near the edge of the road, gawking through the fencing. Karen had wasted no time telling everyone that I had illegally leased the land to foreign agents, claiming the black SUVs were either spies or secretive land developers trying to undermine the community's cultural integrity. She had the audacity to hand out pamphlets at the local gas station titled "Cornspiracy: What Your Farmer Isn't Telling You." It would have been funny if it weren't so stupidly dangerous. She had stirred up so much paranoia in under 24 hours that one neighbor nearly called the sheriff again, asking whether hostile takeover laws applied to space balloons. But Dr. Talley wasn't the kind of person to back down or be distracted. She held a briefing in my driveway for both her own team and the few local officials who had the clearance to hear it. I watched from behind a row of solar panels as she explained the mission in her usual no-nonsense tone. The balloon wasn't a weapon, wasn't surveillance, and certainly wasn't foreign. It was part of a climate data experiment being jointly run by NASA and 2 international research universities. The sensors were designed to gather temperature, pressure, and ozone layer fluctuation data over the continental shelf. Harmless, vital, and now compromised. The field had been selected not just for its remoteness but also because of its soil stability, low electromagnetic interference, and the perfect latitude line required for the balloon to catch the upper jet stream. Dr. Talley pointed at a satellite map, highlighting every marker Karen's bulldozer had destroyed. The underground sensor conduit, the secured cabling channel, even the elevated launch gantry that had been pre-anchored into the earth now lay in twisted steel. Karen had managed to bulldoze over $1 million in sensitive prep work and cause 2 international teams to delay their joint experiment. The repair crew said they needed 36 to 48 hours to patch what they could, if the weather held. As this was unfolding, Karen showed up again. This time, not in a bulldozer, but in an HOA golf cart, flanked by Dennis and another board member named Sandra, who held a megaphone like she thought she was on a parade float. They parked just outside the temporary fencing and immediately began shouting that NASA needed to leave the property. Karen declared the land had reverted to community oversight, due to a supposed clause in the HOA charter about dormant agricultural zones. Dr. Talley didn't even flinch. She walked up to the fence, calmly showed her federal badge, and informed Karen that any further attempts to obstruct operations would result in criminal charges. Karen, never one to take a loss quietly, actually demanded that Dr. Talley provide proof that NASA was a real agency and not a front. She even accused them of trying to frack beneath her house. Sandra, clearly feeling brave with the megaphone, added fuel to the fire by announcing that the HOA had passed a motion declaring the Cornfield a protected community feature and that any federal presence without HOA authorization was to be reported to the sheriff. Dr. Talley didn't argue. She just turned to her communications officer and said 2 words that made my blood run cold. Call press. Within 2 hours, local reporters showed up. Not the big national outlets yet, but local news, a few independent bloggers, and a regional weather network that had been tipped off about a balloon launch. Karen, ever the media hound, saw cameras and transformed from villain to victim in 10 seconds flat. She marched toward them and began spouting a twisted version of the story, claiming she had bravely intervened in an illegal operation and saved the neighborhood from ecological destruction. It was theatrical, Oscar-worthy, even if you like the delusional kind. But here's where things flip. Dr. Talley, having anticipated this, allowed one of the NASA team members to leak a curated brief to the media. Just enough information to counter Karen's hysteria without exposing sensitive data. The report included mission specs, clearance numbers, and a basic rundown of what the balloon would do and why it mattered. And suddenly the public began shifting. Viewers saw the video footage of Karen bulldozing the field, complete with her shouting about weeds and beautification. They saw the comparison photos of the launch site before and after her destruction. They saw the map outlining the sensor grid she flattened. And they saw me, standing shell-shocked in my own yard, holding a launch directive folder, trying to explain that I wasn't growing just corn. I was growing launch integrity for a national research effort. Karen's tone changed. Fast. When reporters asked her how she got access to a bulldozer and whether she had any permits, she claimed Dennis had secured everything. Dennis turned pale. Then Sandra chimed in that she had warned Karen not to proceed without legal review. The whole board began to splinter, pointing fingers as they realized the cameras weren't there to praise them, they were there for accountability. In a last-ditch move, Karen announced she would be filing a cease and desist order against the NASA team and me personally, claiming mental distress and land fraud. Dr. Talley, clearly done playing defense, calmly passed her a folder. In it were documents showing that the Cornfield had been temporarily granted dual designation under Federal Emergency Research Protocol, something Karen couldn't override if she wanted to. That's when it hit her. She wasn't just outmatched. She was legally powerless. Still, she wouldn't retreat quietly. The next day, I received a formal letter from the HOA stating that I owed them $7,900 for unauthorized soil disturbance, unauthorized equipment installation, and failure to comply with community planting regulations. It was absurd. I didn't even respond. I just handed the letter to the NASA legal rep, who laughed and said, "Don't worry, we're going to bury them in actual legal documents soon." That night, as I sat in my living room watching the news play snippets of the balloon prep footage, the gravity of everything settled in. Karen had tried to flex her power to maintain control over something she didn't understand. She was so obsessed with being right, with being in charge, that she bulldozed through federal protocols, ruined a high-stakes mission, and now found herself at the center of a legal and public firestorm. But I also knew Karen. She wasn't going to fade away just because the truth was out. She was going to double down, dig deeper, and probably do something and worse. And if she did, I'd be ready. Because now, this wasn't just about my cornfield. It was about something bigger. This was about respect, about limits, about knowing when you've pushed too far. Karen hadn't learned that yet, but she was going to, whether she liked it or not. 2 days had passed since Karen's infamous bulldozer rampage, and the cornfield that once buzzed with the quiet rhythm of agriculture had transformed into a guarded hub of technical activity. NASA's recovery teams worked tirelessly around the clock, reassembling ground arrays, inspecting cabling for electromagnetic interference, and stabilizing launch pads that had been compromised by Karen's act of unauthorized landscaping. A temporary command trailer had been hauled in, and surveillance drones patrolled the airspace over the area, their presence making it clear that this wasn't just a casual project. It was an operation on a national scale. But while the professionals focused on salvaging the mission, Karen was doubling down in the only way she knew how: chaos. She began by calling an emergency HOA board meeting. Flyers showed up on every door in the neighborhood, even taped to light poles. The title in bold red letters read, "Community Safety vs. Secret Launch Projects. What are they hiding?" The meeting was to be held at the community clubhouse, and was open to all residents. I didn't plan to attend, but curiosity got the better of me. I wasn't just interested in what Karen had to say. I wanted to see who still supported her after everything that had come to light. When I arrived, the room was already packed. Folding chairs lined up in uneven rows, families whispering to each other, half of them curious, the other half already convinced something was wrong. Karen stood at the front in a blue pantsuit that made her look like she was running for office. Dennis sat beside her, expressionless, while Sandra looked like she wanted to vanish into the floor. Karen held a microphone and launched into her pitch the moment I stepped through the door. She claimed the NASA operation was a cover-up, that electromagnetic pulses from the launch equipment were harming birds and bees, that I had violated the neighborhood's environmental covenant. She even claimed that my contract with the government had made her fear for her personal safety, and that her bulldozing had been a preventive safety intervention. It was a train wreck of delusion. Some people nodded along, clearly swept up in her hysteria, while others sat there in stunned silence, their eyes flicking to me as if silently asking, "Is any of this true?" I waited until she was done, then calmly stood and raised my hand. All eyes turned to me. I said nothing for a moment, just looked around the room, then asked, "How many of you believe Karen had the legal right to bring a bulldozer onto private property and destroy a field registered for federal use?" A few hands twitched, but no one raised them. Karen's expression tightened. Then I said, "You don't have to believe me. Just ask the sheriff, who now has a federal subpoena on his desk because of what happened. Or better yet, ask the legal team from NASA, who will be here tomorrow to brief the town council." Karen attempted to interrupt, but Sandra suddenly stood and cut her off. In a shaky voice, she admitted she had advised against the bulldozer stunt, that Karen never got proper board approval, and that Dennis had been misled about the purpose of the operation. Karen tried to silence her, but the room was already turning. One resident shouted, "Why didn't you ask the community before driving a machine through his property?" Another added, "You almost got us all in legal trouble." Karen began flailing, accusing them of being manipulated by government plants. It was unhinged. She even yelled that she had top-secret emails that proved this was all part of a plan to use our town for high-frequency testing. At that point, a teenager in the back laughed and muttered, "Karen thinks NASA's building aliens in the cornfield." I left as the meeting devolved into shouting. But I didn't go home. I went straight to the sheriff's office. I wanted to be sure the legal wheels were turning. To my relief, they were. Sheriff Darby showed me a copy of the federal inquiry letter and confirmed that they had initiated an internal investigation into Karen's unauthorized actions. I asked whether charges were likely. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "If it were up to me, she'd already be in cuffs. But we've got to let the federal guys do their thing. Believe me, they're watching." Back at the field, the repair crews had made impressive progress. Temporary sensor poles had been reinstalled, the cabling grid reconfigured, and even a makeshift control center set up near the treeline. Dr. Talley looked both exhausted and determined. She approached me and handed over a printed map showing the adjusted launch window. The mission, delayed but not cancelled, would still proceed in just over 24 hours. It wasn't perfect, but it would work. When I asked if there were any more threats to the operation, she said, "None from the outside. But we're monitoring Karen closely." That night, something strange happened. One of the security drones detected motion at the rear of the property. A figure in a hoodie crouching near the sensor array. Security moved in instantly, but by the time they reached the spot, the person was gone. What they found, however, made my blood boil. Someone had planted what looked like a crude interference device. Homemade, amateurish, but clearly designed to jam signals. It wasn't powerful enough to disable anything, but it was a message. Someone wanted the launch stopped. The NASA team began scanning for other anomalies while security footage was pulled and handed to local authorities. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but it captured enough to strongly suggest who the saboteur was. Karen's gait was unmistakable, and the footage showed the same designer boots she had worn at the HOA meeting. The next morning, as the sun rose over a field that had become a battlefield of pride, ignorance, and science, I got a call from Alan. He said Karen's house was swarming with officers. Apparently, the footage and the interference device were enough for a judge to authorize a search warrant. Reports from neighbors said she'd screamed at the officers, called them traitors, and insisted she was acting as a civilian inspector under constitutional law. No one listened. They took her phone, laptop, and several folders from her home office. Her beloved HOA badge was also seized. I drove by quietly and watched from the end of the road as Karen stood on her porch, arms crossed, defiance burning in her eyes even as the law closed in. Later that day, I learned that her developer friend, Doug Carmichael, had also been brought in for questioning. Turns out the rumors were true. He had been in talks with Karen about rezoning my land and surrounding properties to make way for a luxury eco-village project. Karen's stunt wasn't about beautification. It was a preemptive land grab. She thought if she destroyed the cornfield, claimed it was a public nuisance, and forced a legal debate, she could eventually claim it as a utility hazard zone and flip it for profit. What she hadn't counted on was that the field was not only mine, but under temporary federal control. Her whole scheme had detonated in her face. The chapter ended for me when I returned to the field and saw the balloon rig, now fully constructed, glowing in the orange hue of sunset. Engineers moved with quiet urgency, running final checks, their focus undisturbed by the noise of the town's drama. And I stood there, knowing we were only hours from launch. The wind had shifted. Karen's grip had loosened. And justice was finally beginning to rise, just like that balloon would tomorrow. The morning of the launch felt like the quiet before a storm. The air was crisp, the skies unusually clear, and the field, once torn to shreds by Karen's rogue bulldozer, now looked eerily pristine. The temporary fencing still surrounded the property, but beyond it, engineers, technicians, and even a few quiet federal agents moved like clockwork. Long tubes of helium hissed as they filled the massive stratospheric balloon, which lay like a sleeping giant across the ground, tethered delicately to its rigging system. The sensor payload was already prepped, polished, and mounted beneath it. Dr. Talley stood by the launch trailer, clipboard in hand, barking instructions into her headset as the countdown window ticked closer. The mission was back on track. But while the air around us was calm, Karen was preparing for a storm of her own. Despite the federal search warrant, Karen had not vanished into retreat. If anything, she had grown more desperate. Word around the neighborhood was that she had begun hosting truth circles in her backyard, trying to convince her remaining supporters that the government was staging the launch to test mind control frequencies. Someone even showed me a video where she pointed at the balloon plans and claimed they were diagrams for an invisible drone cloud. If it weren't so unhinged, it would have been hilarious. But there was an edge to her now, something darker than before. It wasn't just about control or attention anymore, it was about revenge. Late that afternoon, I was on my porch when Alan came jogging over, looking more winded than I'd ever seen him. He didn't even stop for a hello. He just said, "You need to come see this." Now. I followed him down to the far side of the field, beyond the fencing, where the launch team had positioned a remote antenna tower. At first, I didn't see it, but then I spotted the faint glint of something metallic nestled under a bush just a few yards from the tower. One of the security techs arrived and carefully pulled it out with gloved hand. Another interference device. This one slightly more advanced than the last. It wasn't dangerous by itself, but if activated at the wrong time, it could mess with the calibration of the balloon's sensors and potentially force a mission abort. NASA's security team immediately locked down the perimeter again, expanded patrols, and ordered a full sweep of every inch of equipment. That's when they found something even worse. Someone had tampered with the fiber optic line that transmitted real-time balloon telemetry data to the mobile lab. It hadn't been cut completely, but the exposed sheath showed signs of scraping, as if someone had been trying to damage it just enough to create signal distortion. Dr. Talley was livid. She paced the field, her face tight with fury, as her team filed a new report with federal authorities. It was clear now. This wasn't a one-time act of lunacy. It was targeted sabotage. Security reviewed the surveillance footage from the prior night and, once again, caught a shadowy figure near the field perimeter around 2:17 a.m. The gait, the height, the build, it matched Karen almost exactly. This time, though, she had worn a hoodie and gloves, clearly trying to avoid recognition. But her biggest mistake wasn't what she wore, it was what she touched. One of the interference boxes had a partial fingerprint lifted from its inner lid. The forensic tech smiled grimly when he got the match. Karen. No more guessing. No more suspicions. It was her. Later that evening, under the cloak of dusk, something even more insane happened. Karen tried to break into the launch trailer itself. One of the NASA agents spotted movement on the thermal cameras and intercepted her just as she was attempting to pry open the service hatch with what looked like a crowbar. When she was caught, she screamed that she was trying to disable the alien beacon. I watched from the fencing as they restrained her, gently but firmly, and waited for the sheriff to arrive. When he did, Karen exploded. She yelled at him, accused him of betrayal, of working for space fascists, and even tried to bite one of the federal agents. She was restrained again, this time with zip ties, and finally placed under arrest. As she was walked past me, she locked eyes with mine and snarled, "You've ruined everything. But this won't be the end. You don't understand what they're doing." I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Her world had finally caught up with her delusion. And now, she was at the mercy of laws far above her HOA fantasy rules. With Karen officially out of the picture and under custody, the focus returned to the launch. Dr. Tally moved swiftly, checking the timelines, reviewing reports, and coordinating with airspace control. The balloon was now half inflated, shimmering white against the floodlights that had been set up around the site. People from nearby towns had gathered along the public side of the road, leaning against barriers, snapping pictures, and watching in awe. It wasn't every day you saw something like this happen in your backyard. In a surprising move, the remaining HOA board members held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to remove Karen as president. Dennis, who had somehow survived all this without being legally implicated, announced the change via a printed statement slid under every door. It read more like an apology letter than an update. I didn't blame him. He knew the community would never look at the board the same way again. Especially not after almost causing an international incident. Back at the launch site, the engineers ran through their final checklist. A mobile radar dish was calibrated. The helium tanks had completed inflation. The balloon, now towering over the field like a gentle giant, was ready for flight. Dr. Tally approached me quietly and handed me a laminated pass. She said, "This is for observation. You earned it. Not many people would have held it together through this circus." I thanked her and followed her to the main control trailer. Inside, screens flickered with data. Altitude predictions, wind patterns, temperature gradient. The room buzzed with focus. And above it all, the balloon's shell rippled gently in the breeze, waiting. At exactly 5:57 a.m., the countdown began. The field fell silent. A mechanical voice ticked off the seconds. Technicians moved like ballet dancers, each motion precise, fluid, practiced. Then the clamps released. A low, almost ghostly sound followed as the balloon lifted, slow at first, then faster, then soaring. The payload swung beneath it, perfectly balanced, rising higher and higher until it became a dot in the morning sky. Applause erupted outside. Strangers cheered. Even Alan whistled and clapped, tears in his eyes as he watched the symbol of resilience, science, and justice drift into the heavens. Reporters captured every second. And somewhere, Karen, now awaiting arraignment for federal interference, would have to watch it all unfold on a tiny screen in a holding cell. I stayed until the balloon disappeared into the clouds. The crew confirmed stable ascent, full signal integrity, and successful engagement of all sensor arrays. Dr. Tally let out a long breath and smiled. "We did it," she said. "Despite everything." I looked back at the field, the scars still visible from where it had all started, and nodded. The sabotage was over. The mission was a go. And Karen's empire of petty rules, manipulation, and false authority had finally collapsed. All that remained now was the reckoning, and it was rising right into the stratosphere.